All right, welcome. This video is documenting this prediction that the US will invade Venezuela on December 19th, 2025. This is extremely profound. I will explain the extremely profound reasons for how this is known ahead of time. The fact that it is known ahead of time is proven with this video. The post date of the video that you are watching this on proves this, regardless of the media platform. Also, because it's posted on multiple platforms. And no, I do not know anyone at YouTube that could alter a date for me on the post date of a video. But regardless, it's posted on other platforms as well, including rumble.com. And also this this email here, as we can see, I composed an hour ago, but here it's time-stamped by Google as being written on December 15th. Okay, 4 days before the prediction on December 19th. Okay, if you are skeptical, email me and I'll forward this email to you. So this email is documenting the prediction that the US will invade Venezuela on December 19th, 2025. This email contains notes of the insights for this prediction as they came. All right, there is no time to do a proper write-up regarding this information. So I'm just going to go over the notes of the insights as they came in real time. So you will see how all of this formulated, how this understanding came to be. You'll see this process of how this became known, this prediction, through the bits of pieces of the puzzle being put together and figuring it out. It's quite fascinating and, of course, extremely important to understand what's going on here, because God isn't simply communicating a prediction here. And I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the things that I'll be saying, the controversial things that I'll be saying. That's the purpose of this prediction. And these things that I'll be talking about are communicated through the connections from the other prophetic signs that confirm all of this. This is what isn't appreciated by most people that are watching for or interested in God's prophetic signs, is that none of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. This is what makes what is being explained on this channel God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that is only being explained on this channel. Now, first, I have here a link from a Steve Fletcher video. Speaking of other watchers, we have to give credit to Steve Fletcher here, and also in his YouTube channel. And Steve Fletcher and others do talk about connections between signs. Don't get me wrong. But anyway, we have here this insight that the seizure of the oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela hints at the oil that symbolizes Hanukkah. So the festival of Hanukkah regards the rededication of the temple in the 3rd century BC, the origin of this festival. And the rededication of the temple involved lighting successive candles on the menorah. Okay, so this is Hanukkah. This is why you see the menorah symbolism associated with Hanukkah, and why Jews light one candle each day. It represents the period of the rededication of the temple. So anyway, oil symbolizes Hanukkah. So what we have here, December 19th, is the middle date of Hanukkah. It's the middle of Hanukkah this year. And that's why this oil tanker in Venezuela are connecting to it, and why it is known that the U.S. will invade Venezuela on December 19th. Of course, there's much more. Hold on. Venezuela is about ships on the ocean. Why do I say that? Because of the prophetic signs. Well, not only the oil tankers, Venezuela being the largest reserve of oil in the world, which requires ships to ship it around the world, but also we have, over the last number of days, these incidents of the U.S. destroying these boats, symbolic of ships, these drug boats on the open ocean. So as Venezuela symbolizes this, not only this, as I'll explain here, and I'm just going to, because I'm just writing notes and I'm writing to someone who knows things that I'm talking about, right? So Venezuela also is about ships, or symbolizes ships, because of its naming, the naming of Venezuela by Amerigo Vespucci, from which we get the name America. And sometimes people will ask myself, well, why are you always so focused on America with God's signs? And the answer to that is because God is. God is focused on America and Israel. America is un-Israel. America is a chosen nation by God. America is God's Gentile nation. There are only two nations in history that were founded on a relationship with God in the Bible: Israel and America. America represents the times of the Gentiles, which is coming to a close. God is pointing to and communicating America through his signs, or rather, the signs are about America because they are judgment warning signs for America, God's nation. Okay? God isn't politically correct. He chose a people for that matter, right? Which is why the opposite, political correctness, is the spirit of Antichrist. And those people that are anti-American, in general, have a psychology that is anti-American, have the spirit of Antichrist. It's an indicator of where they are going after their life is finished. Someone who is anti-American is not right with God. They do not understand. But it's just a symptom, right? It's just a manifestation of the spiritual issues that they have. That's the truth about anti-Americanism in general. Okay, and so also, as I've explained many times, I guess I'll have to explain it again here, ships symbolize America. There's a description in Revelation chapter 8 regarding the destruction of ships on the ocean. There are many people that claim that America isn't in Bible prophecy. They couldn't be more wrong. And of course, we would expect America to be in Bible prophecy. The thing about the book of Revelation is that it is allegory, it is symbolism. It must be interpreted symbolically. So there's all sorts of hidden meaning in these passages and what's described. The description of the destruction of ships in Revelation chapter 8 isn't there arbitrarily. It isn't there for unimportant poetry. It's there for a very good reason, and a very profound, important reason, and that is that it symbolizes America. In other words, it symbolizes the destruction of America. The destruction of ships in Revelation chapter 8 is completely symbolic of the destruction of America, okay? God might as well have written in that, instead of the destruction of ships, destruction of America. That's what I mean. I mean that as boldly as it sounds. That's a fact, right? This is what I'm saying. When the predictions come to pass that the U.S. will invade Venezuela on December 19th, and I also think that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head on December 19th. When this happens, it'll prove what I am saying, and that's the purpose of the prediction. The purpose of the prediction is not for you to go, oh, cool, neat. You are able to know that this was going to happen ahead of time. Congratulations in figuring that out. That's pretty cool. No, that is not the purpose of this prediction. The purpose of this prediction that is from God, and I know far better than anyone, and you, the reason and purpose for this prediction is to prove the things that I am saying in this video. And it's not for debate either. The ships symbolize America in Revelation chapter 8. Now, why is that? Well, much of the book of Revelation is a parallel with prophecy in the Old Testament. And in Isaiah chapter 23, we have a description of judgment on ancient Tyre. Ancient Tyre in the Bible is symbolic of America. This is because the prosperity and success of ancient Tyre was due to its natural protection by ocean off the coast of the Mediterranean. Ancient Tyre wasn't defeated until finally Alexander the Great built a causeway from the mainland over to the island, which finally led to the downfall of ancient Tyre. Likewise, America is protected by oceans all around it. Okay. Also, Great Britain, the nation and culture that birthed America, is likewise set apart, which is what the word holy means in Hebrew, from the rest of Europe, in order for God to create this unique culture and civilization and language that would ultimately birth America and the other Anglo-speaking nations, which would spread the gospel around the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. That was God's design. Now, in this Isaiah chapter 23 passage, we have a description of Tarshish. There's all kinds of evidence that indicates that Tarshish referred to Great Britain. And in this description of Tarshish in this chapter, we have it being referred to with the euphemism, the ships of Tarshish. Great Britain's success and prosperity and its empire on which the sun never set was due to its naval power and its ships and its merchant ships and its trading around the world. This is likewise the case with America, which can project its power around the world through its ships and its navy and its aircraft carriers, etc. That's why in this passage we have Tarshish and also the daughter of Tarshish. We have the ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish being described in judgment in Isaiah chapter 23. These ships and the ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish are a parallel with the ships that are destroyed in Revelation chapter 8. This gives us 8 and 23, which incidentally is why the Washington, D.C. earthquake occurred on the date 8/23 in 2011. Okay, so I've explained it again. Why is Venezuela important? Well, as Venezuela also symbolizes America through Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci, who named Venezuela. He named Venezuela after Venice. The name Venezuela means Little Venice. But Vespucci was an explorer on ships. And America is named after Vespucci, who named Venezuela. That's how this ties to America, okay? And America is going to invade the nation named after Amerigo, named by Amerigo, as predicted on December 19th. Now, December 19th, the middle of Hanukkah, will be exactly 19 weeks after the 19-year-old NASCAR race driver slipped and fell off of his car number 88 on the date 8/8 in front of the cameras in Victory Lane and broke his collarbone. But this was also the day that the man sliding down the water slide when it busted on the Royal Caribbean cruise ship. There's all kinds of reasons. I've explained in other videos. The Royal, because Elvis, the king, slipped and fell and injured his head, which ultimately led to his death, as I explained countless other times in the other Paul Simon videos. Okay. So, and Paul Simon's big hit, Slip, Slide, and Away, was pointed to with this water slide story on the ship. But also, Revelation chapter 8 begins with a description of the sound of silence in heaven, and Paul Simon's career began with his big hit, Sound of Silence. So Simon connects to the ships, because the sound of silence that begins Revelation chapter 8 is followed later on in Revelation 8:8 with the destruction of ships, as in the car number 88 on the date 88 and the slide. At 19 years old, the 8th prime number, exactly 8th prime number of weeks later, is December 19th, the middle of Hanukkah. Paul Simon is Jewish also. But it was a ship connecting to this predicted invasion of Venezuela, which is all about ships. Because again, of the recent boats, the drug boats, and the seizure of the oil ship, etc. Okay. Now, December 19th will be 23 days after 2 National Guardsmen were shot by the man from 03 unit in Afghanistan, overseen by the CIA. That hints at 23, which confirms the 23 days connection to December 19th. And on this day was news of the actor from Ocean's 11 and his death, his early death. This hints at George Clooney, who starred in Ocean's 11, a movie that isn't about an ocean, that's just the character's name. But as I explained in another video, the really amazing 7-hour-long video that you must watch, and when this prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that every minute of every video must be watched. Clooney also starred in the boat movie, The Perfect Storm, as the captain of the Andrea Gale boat that was on the ocean, and specifically the Atlantic Ocean, which is what Venezuela is on. And there's much more to all of that, which is explained in the other video. But the point is that we do have this connection to ocean here with this 23 days connection. And a boat, okay? The Andrea Gale boat, as I explained in the other video, all of this is about the coming aliyah of American Jews back to Israel in an emergency due to the persecution from the Antichrist, the 44th President, Barack Obama, who will return to the White House in January of 2029, as predicted. Who, by the way, wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball, and will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, and shots symbolize this. This is why 2 National Guard were shot by 03 unit, because the SHOTs being symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, which is the shots. Okay? Now, might the U.S. invasion of Venezuela begin on December 19th? So we're starting to get a clue here that this is what's going on. There is also already scheduled a release of the next wave of Epstein files on December 19th. It makes sense that there would also be a news story that would distract from the invasion. Okay. Well, anyway, Venezuela equals Amerigo Vespucci, which equals ships, because he was an explorer on ships, which equals America, because America is named after Amerigo, which equals Paul Simon, who had a big hit named America, and also American Tune, and is the GOAT, greatest of all time, of American pop music composition. And Paul Simon, like I have explained now, hints at ships because of Revelation chapter 8. Okay, so interesting, because we already knew before all of this that God was pointing to December 19th for Paul Simon's predicted fall and injury of his head. But we have this connection to Venezuela now on the same date. And Venezuela also ties to Simon, like I've just explained here, through Amerigo. Vespucci is known for a quote, because at the time, he was the first to realize that what was being discovered was a new world, not parts of the Far East. Because Columbus thought he had, was discovering a way to India, which is why the Caribbean is called the West Indies, for example. And we have native Indians, right? But Vespucci was the first to go, no, this is as he put it, 1/4 of the world that was previously undiscovered. He called it 1/4 of the world. He realized this was a new world that was previously unknown. So we get the new world from Vespucci. And he called it the 1/4 of the world. And Simon's 4th solo album contains the song Slip, Slide, and Away. And his 4th Garfunkel album contains the song America, which hints at America's opportunity to repent and turn back to God after 9/11, slip, slide, and away. And Paul Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live in Manhattan after 9/11. A cold open with the song The Boxer, which is boxing is about knocking the opponent out and collapsing onto the mat, as in the collapsed towers on 9/11 a few days earlier. The Garfunkel album is Bookends, and Paul Simon's death as a result of his fall and injury of his head, but we don't know when that'll be. We know the date of his fall, but that'll be the bookend to the opportunity to repent that was warned of on 9/11. That's why the album Bookends contains the song America, because the opportunity will have slipped, slidden away symbolically with the death of Paul Simon, which is why Paul Simon is being used to point to the Hebrew idiom that's repeated in the book of Amos for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of the transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. The destruction of ships, the destruction of America is unavoidable, or will be unavoidable once Paul Simon dies. That will be what will be communicated through Paul Simon's death, the bookend to the opportunity to repent after 9/11, the warning. So, okay, so here's where we get some profound, new insight here. Epstein is known for his island in the Atlantic Ocean. We're getting close to Venezuela here. And again, the next wave of files for the Epstein is said to be released on December 19th. And Epstein's known for this island in the Caribbean. The Caribbean extends down to Venezuela. Off the coast of Venezuela is Trinidad and Tobago, which is considered to be part of the Caribbean. So you got the string of Caribbean islands, and if you follow that string all the way to the end, it leads to Venezuela. Okay? And part of that string is Epstein, with his infamous Epstein Island. Okay? This is in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. So Epstein also equals VACCINEs. and VACCINE technology, because Epstein was heavily interested in this, which is why he was involved with Harvard, for example. What Epstein was doing was he was blackmailing researchers and engineers and scientists in this field in order to obtain patents on VACCINEs. That's the truth about where his money came from. It was through blackmailing. It's mafia. Epstein is mafia, right? And he would have these sex parties in order to be able to blackmail people, in order to get rights to patents on this very lucrative industry. A lot of people don't know how lucrative the VACCINE industry is. It's so lucrative that it's completely captured the US government and its regulatory agencies, for example. And just to give you, well, you know what? Speaking of oil and VACCINEs, the amount of money that the oil industry spends on lobbying in Washington, D.C. is the second most amount of money spent by an industry. It's the second industry for lobbying. The VACCINE industry is double the amount of money spent by the second industry, oil. That's how lucrative VACCINEs are. But I just realized this as I'm speaking here. We have a connection between VACCINEs and oil because of what I just described. Interesting. And it all points to Washington, D.C. too. That's interesting. Now, could Epstein hint at Atlantis, which in God's signs is symbolism for technology without God, like the Tower of Babel? So the story of Atlantis is the same as the story of the Tower of Babel. It met its demise, and it had technology that supposedly was far futuristic for its time anyway, or whatever. The story of the Tower of Babel is the attempt with technology, as it's described in the text, to reach heaven, in other words, God, with their technology and without God. And that in itself is symbolism for transhumanism technology and the attempt by man to become immortal through transhumanism technology without God. But immortality cannot come without God because there is a God, and there's a very good reason why people cannot become immortal without God. Heaven wouldn't be heaven if that were to happen. People, as they are, cannot be in heaven. They need to be reformed. They need to be regenerated. Otherwise, heaven wouldn't be heaven. It'd be hell, like this place here that we're on. Okay? So, anyway, that's the truth about the experimental thing that happened in the CVD disease era. Despite the political cult of the blue team and the mass hysteria that chose to ignore how what was being offered to them was an experiment that had never ever been used before, and when it had been experimented on animals before, it ended in disaster every time. But somehow we were to believe that this time it was going to work in an emergency without being properly tested at all, with the same technology that never ever worked before. These people were completely not brainwashed, just completely in a in a zombie-like cult in terms of the word is hypnotized. They were hypnotized, actually. That's what was going on. Like literally, they were hypnotized by the media and the constant fear, which is the best way to get someone to not think clearly. So those that weren't thinking clearly and those that were also tribalistic with their blue team political cult and enjoyed using the MASKs and the VCCINE to beat their opponents with and ostracize them and remove them from society, etc. Although they weren't necessarily doing this consciously, they were in fact using it as a political weapon as well. And so they deserved what they got by taking this thing. And they're going to deserve it even more when they become demonically possessed from taking the thing. Soon. I'm getting to that. Hold on. So anyway, that's what Atlantis symbolizes. Okay, and God has used Atlantis in his signs, okay? Now, Atlantis is, of course, where we get the name of the Atlantic Ocean, and Epstein has islands in the Atlantic Ocean, the Epstein Island. He's got 2 of them, actually, or he had 2 of them, okay? 2 islands, by the way, because there are 2 antichrists. 2 National Guards were shot, for example, because of this reason also. Now, Epstein died, and I could never, until now, till today, really understand the full significance of this. We knew that Epstein was involved with the VACCINE industry, and so that was really enough to confirm what this meant. But, as I'll explain here, there's more to this. But Epstein died exactly 70 weeks before, this is a typo, December 11th, 2020, which was when the regulatory agency that's captured by the VACCINE industry approved the thing. Now, 70 weeks is extremely prophetic because of the 70 weeks prophecy, the most central prophecy in the Bible, in Daniel chapter 9. The 70th week of the 70 weeks is symbolic of the end times, in which the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced by the Antichrist, which is the thing that was approved on December 11th, 2020. That's why he died exactly 70 weeks before that. God did this, arranged this period, this connection, to prove what I'm saying. That Epstein is about the VACCINE industry, but also corruption. Epstein was corrupt. He was the mafia, but he was also an informant for the CIA, because it's also corrupt, because it's all corrupt. And the VCCINE industry is corrupt. That's why the connection to Epstein. And this proves it, right? Now, if you don't believe that the 70 weeks proves this, that the VCCINE industry is completely corrupt and evil, for some reason, if you don't believe it because of the 70 weeks connection here, well, the prediction for December 19th will prove this. And then it's case closed, okay? Feel free to think, well, okay, that's kind of interesting, but it's an accident or whatever. I don't even believe in Bible prophecy. What are you talking about there, Darren? Fair enough. But you will be worse than a fool after the prediction comes to pass on December 19th. What's the word? Incorrigible. Okay? You want to go down the incorrigible path after the prediction comes to pass? Go ahead. There's no better warning that you'll probably ever receive in your life regarding the truth about God and the VCCINE industry, etc., than this prediction. So continue on. Go for it. Continue on in your ignorance after the prediction comes to pass. You've been warned, okay? And it won't be ignorance at that point, because ignorance means to ignore. You will know the truth. Well, I guess it would be ignorance. You would be ignoring the truth because you know the truth when the prediction comes to pass. You should know it already. It's quite obvious. Obviously, it's ridiculous to think that there is no God, and obviously, therefore, if there is a God, obviously he would reveal himself. Therefore, the question is how, and obviously, it's the Christian, righteous Christian God of the Bible, and not the energy God of Buddhism, the impersonal being that's everything. No, obviously not. I mean that in the critical way that it sounds. Obviously. Forgive me. It takes some time to figure that out for people. I do appreciate that. But when you really think about it, and when you really think straight, and look into evidence, simple evidence that's all over the place, it's quite obvious. Okay? And so let's move on. Epstein died at the age of 66. The Pilgrims took 66 days to cross the Atlantic. And that's just not insignificant. That's very significant. The 66 days is extremely important. They anchored, for one thing, off the coast of Cape Cod on the date 11/11. 66 is the 11th triangular number. And triangle of numbers, the last number in the 66th, 11th row is 66. Also, 101 passengers arrived, which also hints at 11 on the Mayflower. And that was followed up 10 years later as in a 1 by the 11 ship flotilla of led by John Winthrop, with the Puritans who founded the Boston colony. 11 ships. So the 66, in other words, is an 11. But the 66 days is really important because it took so long to cross the Atlantic, way longer than they had planned for, because they were prevented from arriving due to a storm that was from God, that blew them way off course and caused them, out of necessity, to anchor in Massachusetts off Cape Cod. Cape Cod, incidentally, is shaped like a giant fishhook. America was used in the age of fishing for men to spread the gospel around the world. America originated as God's nation of Christian disciples. It was a nation founded on Christ. Hence Plymouth Rock. Rock in the Bible is symbolism for Jesus, for example. But anyway, had they made it to Virginia, their intended destination, they wouldn't have survived. And God intended them to go to Massachusetts. It was all providence. And that's because of the native Indian population in Virginia. But the native population in Massachusetts had been decimated by a plague just 2 years prior to their arrival. And when they arrived, they chose Plymouth, which was landed, had already been cleared by the natives, which helped them immensely. And on and on. So the story, there's a huge story. But so 66 days, it symbolizes all this because, had it not been for their long, arduous journey of 66 days, history would have been completely different. But that's, in this context, symbolism of ships and the Atlantic, which is what we're talking about here with Venezuela, right? Okay. And Epstein with his islands in the Atlantic. Now, okay, that's the correction. So it was December 11th. Okay. Whoa. August 8th, 2019, the day that Epstein died, is 2,323 days to December 19th, which sends that to 23 pairs of chromosomes that are altered by the VACCINE thing. It begins with an MR and then ends with an NA, transhumanism technology. That is blasphemy and causes people to be marked. The mark of the Antichrist is this thing because it inserts snake venom into their chromosomes. the protruding amino acid chain on the virus, that was the CVD, is snake venom, which was also then mimicked with the things and inserted into people's chromosomes, which marked their DNA, marked them with the biggest symbol of evil in the Bible, the snake. That's why they've been marked. It's the mark of the Antichrist. Those who take the mark of the Antichrist as described will go to hell. And the thing was the mark of the Antichrist. It wasn't a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. It was the thing. It was the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It did not need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or false form of religious worship. In fact, for those who are wise, it did come with a false form of religious worship, the political cult of the blue team, and the worship of the state, and on and on. And also, it does not need a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is it is in fact judgment for this particular doctrine that Jesus said he hates, the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine, which is dispensationalism, the package in which free grace or cheap grace comes in. Once saved, always saved. Its close cousin being sovereign grace, which comes in the package of Calvinism. Reformed theology. Okay, that's the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. Now, everything that I have just said will be proven to be 100% fact when the prediction comes to pass. And that's the purpose of this prediction. To not appreciate this is to not appreciate this prediction and the purpose of it. And the purpose of this video and video channel. You are wasting your time. You might as well turn off the video now. I'm telling you, I know more than you the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. Okay? It's no more debate at all. Period. End of discussion. It was the mark of the Antichrist. It is currently the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. There will be another one, yes. And it'll be different, yes. But it does not mean that the thing that happened already isn't the thing also. That said, nowhere in the Bible does it say one cannot repent after having taken the mark of the Antichrist. Okay? Anyway, from the death of Epstein, 23 days to this date involving Epstein with the release of the rest of the files and its prediction of the invasion of Venezuela and the prediction that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head because the things inside the SHOTs make their way to people's brains, which will then trigger demonic possession. Thus, the head wound of Paul Simon. And the triggering of the demonic possession will be through frequencies in the air, which is what music is. Okay? Now, August 10th, 2019, when Epstein died, was exactly 131 weeks after the Atlanta 3-28 Super Bowl against the New England Patriots, which symbolizes America and a spiritual founding of America in New England, like I just discussed, with ships for that matter. Well, anyway, it was known as the 3-28 Super Bowl because at one point in the second half, the Patriots were down 3-28. An astounding comeback, the biggest comeback in Super Bowl history, but one of the biggest comebacks, not just in Super Bowl history, but all of history. And so it's known as the 3-28 Super Bowl. And the coach that blew the lead was Dan Quinn. That's because this is at the book of Daniel 3:28, which is the verse that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, and it involves a king, the king of ancient Babylon, That's why we have this connection, as I'll mention here, to Port Royal in Jamaica. Okay? So what confirms all of this? Well, what am I saying? Well, what I'm saying is that the Atlanta Falcons is symbolic of Atlantis. And this was their big Super Bowl and the lead that they blew. Okay? Now, the Atlanta Falcons marched in the Black Lives Matter protest on Pentecost on June 7th, 2020. First of all, this was recognized ahead of time to be a very important date, and God had revealed in 2018 and 19 and 20 that Pentecost was the day that the walls of security collapsed in Jericho. In each of these years, God demonstrated a stunning parallel of signs with the timing of the book of events in the book of Joshua that climaxed with the walls of security collapsing on Pentecost. And so that's why the Atlanta Falcons marched, because the Israelites marched around the walls of security on Pentecost before they collapsed. Now, also on this Pentecost, the CVD official death toll reached 110,000 on June 7th, 2020. Well, that totally confirms everything because Joshua died at the age of 110, and he led the Israelites around the walls of security in a march. Okay, and so the Atlanta Falcons and the Black Lives Matter protest was Spirit of Antichrist, and the Atlanta Falcons marched. And by the way, the Atlanta Falcons go by the nickname Dirty Birds. And it is the dirty birds that are described in Mystery Babylon, which identifies Rome through the cardinals. Now, the dirty birds. Now, so the marching of the Atlanta Falcons on Pentecost was exactly, and this was known ahead of time, by the way. Get this. It was known ahead of time that June 7th, 2020 was exactly 328 years after the real-life Atlantis. I'll describe that in a second. But then, knowing this in advance, you can imagine how stunning it was to see that God used the Atlanta Falcons in the sign that was expected in advance, but we had no idea God was going to involve the Atlanta Falcons. And then he did. And the Atlanta Falcons is all about the 3-28 Super Bowl, and this connection was 328 years. And the Atlanta Falcons marched. There was a news story on that day, and there was no other NFL team that was in the news for such a thing. It was only the Atlanta Falcons that were in the news that day for marching in the Black Lives Matter protest in Atlanta. But it was exactly 328 years after the real-life Atlantis in Port Royal, Jamaica. This confirms it. Amazing. Finally, more insight. Epstein equals Atlantis. Because again, Epstein connects to the Atlanta Falcons with 131 weeks. By the way, the reason why that's so relevant is because of G131, which is the word in the Greek concordance for the Bible for blood disease, which is what a person gets when they take the thing, the CVD disease, the injection, which is what Epstein was all about. And that's how he made his money. Okay, so Epstein's death connects with blood disease to the 3-28 Super Bowl. And again, that hinted at Daniel 3:28, which is the verse that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist, the SHOT, that gives people blood disease. So that's an amazing connection there. Okay, and then the Atlanta Falcons were a prophetic sign 328 years exactly after the real-life Atlantis on June 7th, 1692. Okay? But it was in Jamaica. And as I wrote here, the Epstein Islands are Little St. James and Great St. James because it hints at Jamaica. The Royal Caribbean cruise ship that I mentioned earlier with the slide busting hints at Port Royal, Jamaica. The real-life Atlantis in Port Royal, Jamaica. This proves that the Epstein Islands and Epstein equals Atlantis. Because Atlantis is about the technology without God transhumanism shots, and being an island in the Atlantic. That's Epstein. That's Epstein. So Epstein equals Atlantis here. This is the huge insight now. Now I'll just read a little bit about the real life Atlantis, because it's very interesting, just to give you more of an idea of how important this is here. Okay, in 1692, the Jamaica earthquake. The 1692 Jamaica earthquake struck Port Royal, Jamaica, okay, which at the time was the biggest English city colony, the busiest and wealthiest port in the Americas. This Port Royal in Jamaica. The earthquake just happened to strike the busiest and wealthiest port in the Americas at the time. Okay? A stopped pocket watch found in the harbor during a 1959 excavation indicated that it occurred at around 11:43 local time. I think that I figured out the prophetic significance of that a few years ago, but I forget. Anyway, there are around 5,000 casualties, okay? So let's see. It was a common home port for many of the privateers and pirates operating in the Caribbean. So if you know, there was a time when the pirates and the privateers were English, and they were supported by the British. It was a way to compete with the Spanish. So before England became dominant on the seas, they were the pirates. And they had the support of the English Navy. So the 1692 earthquake caused most of the city, which by the way is just symbolic of corruption. Because as we'll see here, so Cotton Mather, the famous reverend in Boston, viewed the disaster as not only being pointed to Jamaica, but behold, an accident speaking to all our English America. Because at that time, Boston was a colony of England. It was all English America. So Port Royal at that time was essentially America. So do you see? It's not like today where Jamaica is a separate country, right? Back then, it was the same country as Boston. It'd be like if today we had the equivalent prophetic sign in New York City, the busiest, wealthiest city in America. Back then, it was Port Royal. But back then, it was corrupt because of the just symbolically, right? Of the pirateering that the English were doing. Okay, so and members of the Jamaican Council declared, "We are become by this an instance of God's almighty severe judgment." Okay, so this was viewed at the time as being definitely divine retribution on the people of Port Royal for their sinful ways. Okay? And rightly so. I mean, like, if there's a God, I mean, this isn't an accident because it's right in Port Royal, which just happens to be, at the time, the busiest and wealthiest city in the Americas, the wealthiest port. Okay? So what a coincidence. So what did happen? Well, the earthquake caused most of the city to sink below sea level. That's why it was the real life Atlantis. About 2,000 people died as a result of the earthquake and the following tsunami. And another 3,000 people died in the following days due to injuries and disease. So there was a liquefaction of the land, and it just instantly fell into the ocean. Okay, it's the most of the city sank. It destroyed Port Royal. Port Royal, this busiest, wealthiest port, all of a sudden went beneath the ocean. You can imagine the people at the time, like I just explained, considering it to be an act of judgment by God. Okay. So that happened. So that explains that. And so again, all of this confirms the real life Atlantis, confirms through what I explained that Epstein is symbolic of Atlantis. Again, 131 weeks, Epstein's death, Atlanta Super Bowl, 3-28, which is about the mark, which is giving people blood disease, which is what 131 symbolizes. That's clear. And also Epstein is involved with the thing industry, like I explained, which is why he was associated with Harvard, etc. And then the Atlanta Falcons marched 328 years exactly after the real-life Atlanta Port Royal, Jamaica earthquake. And again, it was the 328 Super Bowl. Okay. But also Jamaica gives us Great St. James and Little St. James Islands, the Epstein Islands in the Atlantic. That ties Epstein to Atlantis. Okay. And also King James, right? Because we have, well, King James, would have been before 1692. So the Super Bowl on February 5th, 2017, the 3-28 Super Bowl, is 130 weeks to Epstein's death, which is in turn 23 days to December 19th. Again, 23 pairs of chromosomes. Also, Epstein's death, August 10th, 2019, is exactly 70 weeks to the approval of the thing. And the first American to take the thing a few days later was also the middle date of Hanukkah that year. December 19th is the middle date of Hanukkah this year. Epstein was Jewish. The Atlanta Falcons players marched on Pentecost. Israelites marched on Pentecost when the walls collapsed, like I explained. They marched on Pentecost in the Black Lives Matter protest 66 months and 6 + 6 days before December 19th. The Epstein files release, anticipated release, and Epstein died at the age of 66. Pilgrims, 66 days on the boat to cross the Atlantic, the predicted invasion of Venezuela, which is all about the boats, as I explained. Also, RFK Jr., who is obviously associated with the VACCINE and God's voice speaking the truth about it, which is why, incidentally, RFK Jr. has an issue with his voice. It's symbolism designed by God to point to him as being God's voice for truth regarding all of this. RFK Jr. is known to be a falconer. That's amazing. Why is RFK Jr. a falconer? It has to be for a prophetic reason. It is what I just said. It's because of the Atlanta Falcons. It's because the begins with an MR and ends with an NA thing is transhumanism technology, which is symbolized by Atlantis, which is where we get the name Atlanta. And the Atlanta Falcons, which is why RFK Jr. is a falconer. That's amazing. I'm sure if we looked into it, we could find connections to December 19th to RFK Jr. prophetic science. Probably. I don't know for sure. But anyway, and furthermore, we could probably find RFK Jr. signs to the Atlanta Falcons. I don't know that either. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. In fact, that's probably why there won't be any connections, because it doesn't matter. The day the Atlanta Falcons marched, exactly 328 years after Atlantis, on Pentecost, was also the day of officially 110,000 deaths. Like I mentioned, Joshua died at age 110. Okay. RFK Jr. once flew with Epstein, so they did have a meeting. They did connect. Epstein invited him and his family onto the plane when, I think, if I recall, they traveled out to ski in Colorado. And that's when, as RFK Jr. said he realized that Epstein was weird and had no further contact with him. And Epstein likewise was figuring out whether or not RFK Jr. could be brought into the corrupt fold, could be used in any way. And then Epstein also, at the same time, I'm sure realized, well, no, there's no relationship to develop here with RFK Jr. And that was that. So just brainstorming, Trump blames Nicholas for illegal aliens. By the way, Nicholas hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which I already explained what precisely that is. And again, there's no debate regarding that. I don't care to prove that in this video. It's just when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove it. Reformed theology and free grace, okay? That's the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates, and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. That doctrine is the reason why most evangelicals have a phobia regarding works, for example. So Trump blames Nicholas. I'll get to the significance of Nicholas here in a second because it's related to what I'm going to say right here, for illegal aliens, okay? So during the election campaign, Trump was talking about the invasion and has repeatedly mentioned how, and accused the leader of Venezuela, Nicholas, for emptying his prisons so that they could be funneled into America. Okay? I personally believe that's true, of course. But the point is that that's what Trump is saying. So Trump is tied to this. Now, if Venezuela equals Amerigo equals America, would an invasion of Venezuela symbolize the invasion of America by demons pretending to be aliens? Because that's what the illegal alien invasion in itself symbolizes. So wouldn't the invasion of Venezuela also symbolize this, in other words? Well, the answer is yes. The coming predicted invasion of Venezuela on December 19th, the middle day of Hanukkah, is or will be symbolism for the coming predicted invasion of demons pretending to be aliens. That's what illegal aliens and the invasion of them is symbolic of. Speaking of walls of security collapsing in God's judgment in the book of Jericho, they did so, or the walls collapsed after the Israelites blew trumpets. Trump, especially his first campaign and first presidency, was synonymous with his border wall of security. After he was removed from office, the wall of security collapsed in God's judgment, and thus the invasion of the illegal aliens. It's judgment from God, perpetrated by Satan's political party, the demon cats. And for the purpose of bringing down America. I mean, in their delusion, they think that they're doing good, just like the Nazis thought they were doing good, and just like everyone always thinks they're doing good, even if they're doing evil, because they need to bring in the illegals so that they can get more Democrat votes and have a permanent majority and bring in socialism and communism. That's their goal. Right? I mean, they can't win at the ballot box, so they tear down the border. Bring in the third worlders because we know they'll vote Democrat. That's all it is. They're wicked and anti-American, wanting to change America. I mean, conservatives stand for American values, and the liberals of today do not. They hate America. And that's why they serve Satan without realizing it. It's part of that spirit of Antichrist that they don't realize they have. Okay? Now, so this is amazing. This is what the invasion of Venezuela will symbolize. The coming invasion of demons pretending to be aliens. Okay? And how is that? Because Venezuela and Nicholas is all about tied to the illegal invasion of illegal aliens. Because Nicholas emptied his prisons. That's symbolic of the emptying of the bottomless pit prison described in Bible prophecy, in which the demons dwell. And when it's opened, they'll go through the wall of security between the demonic realm and the earthly realm. Right? Trump trumpeted how Nicholas emptied his prisons in an illegal alien invasion of America. The bottomless pit is emptied. The prison is emptied in the book of Revelation. Wow. Oh, wow, exclamation mark. December 19th is 1,224 days before this date, April 26, 2029. That's predicted to be the beginning of the invasion of demons pretending to be aliens. This is the date God is pointing to. This is also the date on which it is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected by demons pretending to be aliens. And they'll make him the ambassador for the world and making him the Antichrist immediately. But this 1,224 days connection is amazing, because this date wasn't looked at prior to this understanding as being related to April 26, 2029 and the invasion of demons. And this is relevant because G 1224 is the word in the Greek concordance for to cross over, pass as in pass through, as in the demons crossing over from the demonic realm into the earthly realm, passing through the portal, through the door that's unlocked with the key as it's described in Bible prophecy. The emptying of the prison like Nicholas in Venezuela did. Amazing. Do you know how evil that is, right? To empty your prisons and then pass them into another country in order to get rid of your undesirables. I mean, okay, I think it's clear that the U.S. will invade Venezuela on December 19th. It's absolutely clear. And it's because of the symbolism that I'm saying, which will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. There was an assassination attempt on Nicolas Maduro. Okay, so why Nicholas? Nicolaitan doctrine. The Nicolaitan doctrine, as I mentioned earlier, is a big reason why, quote-unquote, Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist, which is leading to demonic possession by demons when they cross over from the prison that they will have emptied. And so it's judgment. The mark is judgment for these quote-unquote Christians' Nicolaitan doctrine. And a big part of what Nicolaitan means, the word Nicolaitan is a cognate from Greek of two words, ruling over the laity. In other words, when Jesus warned, and the first warning he gave to the disciples regarding the end times, he said, beware of those who come claiming to be Christ. Well, the word Christ is Greek for Messiah. And Messiah is Hebrew for anointed one. And there are other anointed ones, other messiahs in the Bible other than Lord Jesus Christ. And Jesus said that the Christs that would come would fool many people. Lead many people astray is what he said. He would not fool. He said that they would lead many people astray. Well, the idea that Jesus was speaking about people claiming to be Jesus Christ, leading many people astray, makes no sense. Because there haven't been many of those. He said there will be many Christs, and they will lead many people astray. Well, there haven't been many people claiming to be Lord Jesus Christ. And certainly there hasn't been many of them that have led many people astray. When someone claims to be Lord Jesus Christ, most people correctly can assume that the person has a mental problem. Right? The masses, the many people haven't been led astray by many Christs. That's not true. That hasn't happened. And nor will it happen in these last days. Jesus was talking about people claiming to be anointed ones. He was talking about pastors, Nicolaitans, ruling over the laity. He was talking about pastors and priests and reverends and bishops and popes. They are the Nicolaitans, and these people will tell you, if you ask them, well, what was Jesus referring to when he was talking about the Nicolaitans in the book of Revelation? So the letters to the churches were for all time, but specifically for the end times. But for all of the church age. Because the warnings there apply to everyone and every Christian. But they were also about the end as well. And anyway, Jesus mentioned that he was coming to make war on the Nicolaitans. That's the end, right? That's definitely a reference to the end times. Coming, future tense, to make war on that. So that's the end times. That's a reference to the end times. Okay? He's coming to make war on the Nicolaitans. Well, who are the Nicolaitans? And he mentioned it twice. He mentioned how he hates the Nicolaitans twice. So it's pretty important. Do you really believe, like they'll tell you, the Nicolaitans will tell you, that we are supposed to believe them when they say, well, we don't really know what Jesus was talking about? I mean, it's kind of unclear. So don't really dwell on that too much. You know, we don't really know exactly what he's talking about, but we kind of maybe think that, you know, it's kind of like some bad Christians or something like that. But we don't really know. But it's bad Christians. Let's just say they were bad Christians. Yet Jesus mentioned it twice and said that he hates them, and he talks about their doctrine, and he says he's coming to make war on them, and we're thinking that, and we're supposed to believe that we aren't able to be clear on what he was talking about? Well, the reason why we're not to be clear on that is because he was talking about them. The ones that will tell you that they don't really know are the Nicolaitans, the rulers over the laity. It's quite simple. They are the Christs, the many anointed ones that Jesus warned of that would lead many people astray. And now it is more dangerous than ever to be following a pastor. Jesus forbid pastors. He forbid teachers. He said, call no one your teacher. You only have one teacher. John said, for example, in his epistle, for you have no need for us to teach you. You have the Holy Spirit. And we also furthermore now have the canon, the Bible. We are not to have teachers. Jesus is the only teacher, and he said that for good reason. And he also forbid preaching for money. Now, these Nicolaitans will twist passages of the writings of Paul to claim that they can preach for money and also preach as teachers. Let me explain. First of all, when Paul talked about receiving, if you read the passages and don't isolate them out of context and twist them, if anything, he was talking about food, never money. But he was not talking about the form of preaching that they do. He was talking about evangelists on the road kind of thing. not establishing a business, which is what a church is today, where the alpha male steps up to the stage and speaks for 45 minutes, and if you have anything to say regarding what he has to say, you'll be immediately escorted out of the church and probably asked never to return. Yet even Paul said, if someone is speaking and another has something to say regarding what he is saying, let the person who is speaking be silent. But when will we ever see that today? If I were to go into a church, for example, and start talking about prophetic signs, I'd be immediately escorted out because of the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. And the Nicolaitans, who have 100% monopoly on information and believe they have the right to have 100% monopoly on information. And how is that anything different than Maduro? How is that any different than Nicolas Maduro, the socialist dictator? They are socialist dictators. Socialist dictators monopolize information, which is what so-called pastors do, and cut off the body of Christ and allow no one else to speak. Even Paul said, shut up, let the person speak. But they, in their deluded doctrine, believe that they need to have 100% monopoly on the information because, well, they're the shepherd and they need to care for their flock. But actually, they are the hired hand that will flee when the wolf comes, as Jesus said. And he said, be warned of those. These are the pastors today. They're the hired hand that will flee, that don't really care about the flock. They can't care. Only Jesus cares about the flock, and they are not their flock. They are in Jesus' flock. They aren't shepherds. They don't. Okay, now, regarding the passages of Paul that they claim to support pastors, they occur in these letters to Timothy. And these letters to Timothy were written near the end of Paul's ministry. There are people that will say, well, the Bible is inerrant. There's no error. Well, no. There are things that do contradict each other in the Bible, right? Including writings of Paul. He was a human being. And in the early days, he was clear about their not being pastors or teachers, just like all of the others were. Peter and John. Also, there's many passages you can cite that are against this idea. But the latter writings, these few passages in the letters to Timothy, were a result of Paul getting frustrated with the state of these churches and felt he needed to establish some authority and hierarchy in these churches, which is what Jesus forbid. Okay? Now, so it's up to you to decide which passages you want to believe of Paul's, because there are other passages that contradict those passages that the Nicolaitans will cite. But Jesus forbid teachers. So that's what the word pastor means, right? The Catholics even call their priests father. Jesus forbid that. And actually, the modern Protestant churches are really not very much different than the way in which people met in the Catholic Church, sitting on rows of seats listening to someone speak for a long time, who has the supposed authority over everyone else. And then collects the money, just like the Catholic Church, right? Not much has changed, actually. Okay, so that's that subject. So that's why the Nicolas Maduro here, the socialist dictator, he's a Nicolaitan. But regarding the mark of the Antichrist, many quote-unquote Christians took the mark of the Antichrist because their Nicolaitan leaders, the so-called leaders that they're supposedly supposed to follow, didn't warn them about what the thing was, even though there were other Christians warning people about what it was. These Nicolaitans, because that's their nature, because they're interested in keeping as many people in their congregation as possible because they're motivated by money and it can't be helped. Money is corruptive. That's why Jesus forbid preaching for money. He knew exactly what would happen. He knew exactly that the Nicolaitan doctrine would be institutionalized in these institutions that would pass it down from generation to generation through money. The moneyed church is the cause of the Nicolaitan doctrine throughout the centuries. You don't ever come to the conclusion of Calvinism, for example, unless you are taught it. No one ever will come to you need to be taught how to interpret all of the passages in the Calvinistic way, and then taught the workaround solutions to the many countless passages that contradict the Calvinist doctrine, just for example. But there wouldn't be Calvinism and Reformed theology were it not for the moneyed church, which Jesus forbid. Jesus forbid all of this. He knew that all of this would lead to all of this. It would lead to the Catholic Church, which is evil, but so is the Protestant Church. All of them, all of the denominations are. There's 45,000 denominations according to one study today. There's only one denomination. That's Jesus' denomination. And every one of the denominations, by definition, has some way in which they contradict the teachings of Jesus. That's what makes them different from the rest. They have to, in some way, contradict the teachings of Jesus. By definition, that's what makes them a denomination. And so, the mark of the Antichrist that people took because their Nicolaitan leaders didn't warn them about it, and either told them, well, it's up to you to decide what you want to do, or they said something like it's a precursor, if anything, or most of them didn't even go that far. They said, oh, no, it's fine, take it. These Nicolaitans are what led people to take the mark, and the sycophant followers of these Nicolaitans took it, and they deserved it. They were disobeying Jesus when he said, don't have any teachers. And don't listen to their doctrine, which he hates and is coming to make war on. Okay? And so the mark of the Antichrist is leading to demonic possession after the invasion of the demons pretending to be aliens, and that's why his name is Nicolas Maduro. And the coming invasion of Venezuela and the ousting of the leader who emptied his prisons of the aliens that ended up becoming illegal aliens will symbolize all of this. How the quote-unquote Christians took the mark of the Antichrist that's leading to their demonic possession soon because of the Nicolaitan teachers of today. Now, when this prediction comes to pass, it will prove everything that I have just said. Make no mistake. I know far better than you and anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction. Everything that I have just said is fact. It's true. It is and will be true when this prediction comes to pass. That is the purpose of this prediction, okay? It is to identify what the Nicolaitan doctrine is, what the mark of the Antichrist is, etc., who the Antichrists are, etc. It's all true when the prediction comes to pass, okay? Now, I was just staring at this here, and I realized that Maduro, the assassination attempt on Maduro, was on the Antichrist's birthday. That's interesting. And, well, anyway. So the assassination attempt on Nicolas Maduro's on Barack Obama's birthday was 371 days or 53 weeks before Epstein's death. 371 is 7 times 53, which is the fourth prime number times the 4 times fourth prime number, and this was the 44th president's birthday. And it was his 59th birthday, and 59 is the fourth super prime number. Because 59 is the 17th prime number, 17 is the 7th prime number, and 7 is the 4th prime number. Well, anyway, 4 symbolizes a door through which the demons pass through, because the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. So that's why this is all relevant, because of this invasion we were talking about, which is symbolized with Venezuela and Nicolas Maduro. So Venezuela equals Vespucci, which also equals 1/4 of the world, because of his quote that I mentioned earlier. He was the guy to first state that this wasn't the Far East, this was a 1/4 of the world that had previously been unknown. April 26th, 2029, like I said, will be 1,224 days after the predicted Trump invasion of Venezuela. Will be 4 years, speaking of this 4 theme here, 4 years after Trump's attendance at Pope Francis's funeral with Zelensky, which God uses in his signs to symbolize the 44th president. The first Jewish leader of Ukraine hints at the first black president. This Zelensky was 44 years old. He just turned 44 right before the invasion, speaking of invasion, of Ukraine, and the Exodus, speaking of Aliyah, of Jews, Jewish leader. Interesting, that all just came to me. Which at the time was a nation that was made up of 44 million people. And he had just turned 44 years old and was 44 years old throughout the first year of the war, which involved all of these prophetic signs and his appearances at these world meetings. For example, the UN and the G20 summit and all of that. And that's because it was all symbolism for the 44th president leading the UN, et cetera, and leading the world, the Antichrist. So in other words, Zelensky is used in the signs as Antichrist symbolism for the Antichrist. And anyway, Zelensky met with Trump at the other Antichrist's funeral exactly 4 years before it's predicted that he will be resurrected. And that's again because 4 symbolizes the door, and the Pope Francis will be resurrected through demons that will pass through the door, which is why Vespucci and the 4th of the world connection here, and Venezuela and the invasion of it being symbolic of the invasion of illegal aliens, because Venezuela emptied its prisons of prisoners that ended up being illegal aliens in America. Okay, so December 16th this year, my friend wrote this. This is tomorrow. No, actually, this is tomorrow, December 16th. It's right now December 16th my time, but it's not December 16th in America yet. And anyway, America was born on this date, 9,110 days, which is at Revelation 9:11. Okay, so December 19th, though, the date we're looking at here, is exactly 11,190 weeks after Venezuela declared independence from Spain. That's important. So Venezuela is symbolized by its, birth date, as is America. And so this hints at Revelation 9:11, which is what we're talking about, because Revelation 9:11 is the passage that symbolizes, in God's signs, the emptying of the prisons from the bottomless pit, demons crossing over into the earthly realm. And here's another insight. Does Maduro symbolize King Apollyon, who's described in Revelation 9:11? Well, yes. Maduro is a drug kingpin. He's the drug lord. This is totally symbolism for King Apollyon. Oh, and by the way, the drug boats and all the drug, the illegal drugs trade, all of this is symbolism for the pharmaceutical industry and the mark of the Antichrist. That's the reason why Venezuela is associated with the drugs and the illegal drugs, the corruption. It's all symbolism for the so-called pharmaceutical drugs that are corrupt. And furthermore, the leaders of that industry are not even essentially, they are drug kingpins. They are mafia. It is a mafia thing, right? The pharmaceutical industry today is a mafia. which is why it's not a coincidence that one of the facilitators of this is an Italian from Sicily. You know who I'm talking about. His name actually, Fauci, which rhymes with Vespucci, by the way. Oh, that's amazing. Vespucci rhymes with Fauci. Whoa. By the way, Fauci became the head of his agency. I know the name, I'm not going to say it. On the same date, which was November 2nd, 1984, the same day that the movie The Killing Fields was released. The name Fauci means in Italian sickle, as in the fields that are harvested in Revelation chapter 14 with a sickle, and then the grapes of which are thrown into the winepress of God's wrath. Yeah, but that's amazing. Fauci rhymes with Vespucci, and Vespucci equals Venezuela, and Venezuela is known for the drug, but corrupt drugs, as is Fauci. Wow. Always these new things come to me as I go through the information. Okay, so December 19th is 935 days after the Venice canals turned green on May 29th, 2023. In the Greek concordance, 935 is king. In the Hebrew concordance, 935 is to enter, as in King Apollyon and his demons entering the earthly realm. That's amazing. Now, excellent. That day, this date, the Venice canals turned green, because Venezuela is named after Venice, as I mentioned earlier. That day connected to Israel's Green Pass and also Green Day's concert evacuation in St. Louis due to lightning on the 45th anniversary of the movie Apocalypse Now release, the movie that cost $45 million due to a storm. Okay, that's just a little side thing here, but there's more confirmation of the significance of green. But the canals symbolize the arteries. Green is symbolism for the green horse in the book of in the book of Revelation, the four apocalyptic horses. The last one being the horse of disease and pandemic and pestilence, and so that's why green. That's why the canals turn green, because it's symbolism for the arteries that the SHOTs corrupt with the plague. And actually, the thing did and still does make one more likely to get the disease than less likely, because it compromises their immune system, for one thing. So the concert, there's another prophetic Green Day concert, which was a fire, which was involving a tree, from what I recall. And that hinted, as we concluded earlier, at Revelation 8:7. But that concert is 8 months and 7 days before December 19th. That's amazing. Because Revelation 8:7 involves, a third of the green world, earth, the grass, and the trees being burned up. Okay, last but not least here, 23 days after 2 guards were shot near Trump in the White House by the Afghani from 03 unit, which hinted at 23, will be December 19th, and the predicted invasion of Venezuela. On Thanksgiving Day, the first American Pope began his first trip abroad to 2 nations, and in response to the shooting, Trump declared a halt to all alien immigration from third world nations, another hint at 23. Afghanistan and Venezuela are third world nations. A, Afghanistan, is the first letter of the alphabet. V, Venezuela, is the 22nd letter of the alphabet. And again, we have the Pope mentioned here, right? The Pope began his first trip abroad, the first American Pope, first trip abroad, 2 nations, Trump, third world nations, 23. 23 days before, to December 19th. 23 pairs of chromosomes altered by the mark of the Antichrist. Barack Obama wore number 23 in high school basketball. Okay, now, Afghanistan and Venezuela are third world nations, and they are hinted at here because the guy was from Afghanistan, and that's why Trump talked about third world nations. And we have Venezuela being connected to. So A and V give us 1 and 22. 122 is equal to Pope Francis, as in Pope Francis, as in Pope Leo on his trip in simple English gematria, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. And 122 is equal to San Francisco in simple English gematria. And San Francisco is on the 122nd meridian line. The reason why 122 is because it is the 41st semi-prime number, and key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria. And a key is what will open the door to the bottomless pit from the demons will cross pretending to be aliens and resurrect Pope Francis. And keys, musical keys, are used in music composition, which is why Paul Simon was born in the year 41. And keys symbolize the Vatican, which is why 122, Pope Francis, San Francisco, and the 122nd meridian line. It all points to the key that opened the bottomless pit, thus giving rise to the Antichrist, the leader of the Vatican, symbolized by keys. 124, as again, G124 is the word to cross over, pass through. 1,224 days after the predicted U.S. invasion of Venezuela on December 19th, 2025, 2,224 days later, it is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected by demons pretending to be aliens, as in the illegal aliens from Venezuela, as in the alien from the Afghani that did the shooting. All right. Amazing. All right. Thank you for listening to this video, for going through the whole video. I have a request. I need financial assistance. I have been living, for me to have been able to explain all of what I have just explained, required years of studying and following God's big picture of signs and working on this from morning until night for more than full-time hours for 7 years. And during this 7 years, I have lived at poverty levels. I had prior to this changing my life and dedicating my life to this ministry, I had a successful business, and that all evaporated when I decided to focus on this instead. Okay, and I also spent my savings, okay, on ministry. At this point, though, after all of these years of this full-time work, I have been living at poverty levels, but right at this very moment, I'm in a desperate emergency situation where I'm in a particular need right now, and so I need some help. If you would like to help me, I'd really appreciate it. Please contact me at my email address, darrenjacksinbox@gmail.com. Okay, you can see it right here, darrenjacksinbox@gmail.com. I really appreciate it. I really need help right now.